Egypt, elections, the military, the Muslim Brotherhood, exciting times. Daniel Pipes is one of the most experienced and able commentators on the Middle East, well, I think, in the world. And he joins us now from sunny Philadelphia. How are you?
Thank you. Good morning. Well, good afternoon.
Or even evening.
Thank you for the kind words.
Depending on the time zone. No, it's a pleasure, and I mean it very much. Now, I don't think we should be particularly surprised by the election results. It was pretty much down the middle, sort of 51-49. But it's what happens next. The military haven't gone away. They're still there. So can the new leader of this country govern as someone from the Muslim Brotherhood, or just govern as a pragmatic politician, knowing there are a few generals behind the scene?
I'd say the latter. In my understanding, Egypt has been under military rule for 60 years now. And the military, as embodied by the Supreme Council for the Armed Forces, or SCAF, is intent on keeping that power. And I would interpret the last year and a half since Mubarak's fall till this election in the light of the military doing everything it can to keep power. And as I see it, Mohamed Morsi is president at the sufferance of the military. He has a job without a job description, and what it will be is at the decision, at the pleasure of the military. This is really about the military. It's not about the Muslim Brotherhood. It's really about, the real question here is, can the military keep control, or might it lose control?
Right. Is there any point in considering Turkey? Because we were always told and believed that the military in Turkey was all-powerful, and they really decided who did rule the country. We had an Islamist government, and not as harsh as a Muslim Brotherhood government, that came into power. Various colonels and generals were arrested, sometimes trumped up charges. The military now in Turkey, to a large extent, does do what it's told.
That's a good point. Yes, the military was behind the scenes the ultimate power in Turkey for decades and decades. And then for a variety of reasons, it lost the will to continue to maintain that preeminent ultimate role. I don't think that the Egyptian military has lost that will. It's still determined to have power, to have the benefits of power, the economic benefits, the prestige benefits. So as I understand it, the SCAF is very intent on keeping its power. By the way, Mubarak's overthrow was, yes, in part stimulated by the crowds in Tahrir Square, but also in part by the military leadership saying, no, we don't want Mubarak's son, the banker, to become the next president of Egypt. We're going to get rid of him, and we're going to take control ourselves. Now, they can't completely take control. They'll have a revolt on their hands. So they're trying to control it as much as possible, giving away as little as possible. And by the way, recall that just in last week, the military, the SCAF, has set out a set of decrees that in effect give it ultimate control over the Constitution, over the presidency, over the parliament. And so they are legally now in a position to have whichever way they want. So keep your eye on SCAF. That's the key here. Not the parliament, not the president.
What about the composition of the armed forces, though? I have no doubt that those of senior rank have a certain political position, but it's a mass army and recruited often from the same people who support the Muslim Brotherhood. What about the enlisted men, the NCOs, the junior officers? Would they be more supportive of the Brotherhood?
Well, it's not to say, I'm not saying that the military leadership is anti-Islamist. Indeed, if you look at the last 60 years since the military took over, it's a far more Islamist country today than it was in 1952. Now, that's not only due to the military. The military has not been against it. For example, it was Sadat who halfway through this 60-year period implemented the Sharia, Islamic law, as the basis of all law in Egypt. So it's really not so much about principle, whether you're for or against Islamic law. It is more about who is going to actually be in control. Is it going to be the Muslim Brotherhood with its leadership, its cadres, or is it going to be the military? So from this point of view, the soldiers in the military can be quite Islamist themselves. The officers can be, and yet they can still want to have power for themselves and economic benefits for themselves. So I don't see that there's a huge gap here. It's a gap over personnel rather than over ideology. And indeed, Mohamed Morsi in his first major speech today complimented the military and said how he's a great admirer of the military. Well, he has to say that because he wants to stay on good terms with the military, but at the same time, there is no profound difference of outlook. So I'm giving you a quite different view from the conventional one, but I think it helps explain what's been happening over the past year and a half.
No, I think it's extremely compelling. Now, I was looking through some of the Israeli newspapers over the weekend. There have always been people who said Sinai should never have been given up, but some fairly establishment figures saying maybe this was not such a good idea. The relationship with Israel, I understand it's governed by necessity. I don't think Egypt could afford or win a war, but it's not going to be a close relationship any longer, surely.
Well, it hasn't been a close relationship over the last 30 years. Mubarak was no friend of Israel, whether it be allowing arms into Gaza or going after Israel in international fora or encouraging anti-Semitism in the Egyptian press. Mubarak was no close friend of Israel. At the same time, as you're suggesting, there was a maintenance of the status quo, what the Israelis called a cold peace. Will the change of the last year and a half lead to a fundamental rupture in that cold peace? I don't think so, because again, I see the military's behind it. The military, knows what it's like. The head of SCAF is a man by the name of Mohammed Tantawi, and Tantawi was a soldier in 1973. He actually lost a war against Israel. He was part of it. So I don't think they're going to be terribly eager to rip up that peace treaty and start again a war. By the way, sorry, Tahtawi, not Tantawi, is the name of the head of SCAF.
Last question, the other side of Israel, Syria, I think it's probably when Assad does fall, again, the Muslim Brotherhood in another shape and form are aspiring to power there. If you have a Brotherhood leadership in Egypt and the Brotherhood in power in Syria, surely that paints a very different picture.
Well, if the Brotherhood comes to power in Syria and really gets control of the country, then it is in charge, unlike in Egypt. In Egypt, I'm saying it's the shadow of power rather than power itself. But if this were to happen, as you suggest, in Syria, and were it to be under Turkish auspices, then yes, then it'll be a very different story.
Yeah.
Again, the Assad regime has not been exactly friendly to Israel, but over the decades there has developed a certain status quo, and they've learned to live with each other. The Syrian regime is very close to the Iranian regime, and all sorts of problems there for Israel. But overall, is it better or worse for Israel to have a regime change in Syria? I would say it's dangerous. It could be worse. It could be better. Yeah. It's a little hard to predict at this point.
Yeah. You're completely right, meaning that I agree with you. As always, it's a great pleasure. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Michael.